So a lot of times we are discussing with clients which is a better option, employer sponsorship or applying independently. And I think we need to discuss some of the key factors when comparing both pathways.
Sure.
So if we're looking at employer sponsorship, what would you say is the most important aspect of employer sponsorship?
So employer sponsorship, it's important to understand that it is driven by an employer. So you do actually need an employment contract or employment offer by an Australian employer in order for them to undertake your employment in order to apply for a visa.
Okay. So I know a lot of times when people are looking for work and they're applying for work, they have to tick a box that says, do you have working rights? So is it correct in saying that without a job offer, you don't have work rights?
Yes, that's right. So work rights is subject to the visa that you hold. So in order to work full-time for an employer, one of the visa programs is the employer-sponsored visa, which requires the employer to sponsor you and allow you to have work rights in order to work in Australia.
Okay. And now if we're looking at applying independently, what would you think are the key factors there that people need to be aware of?
The independent visa program is usually under the General Skilled Migration program. Now, you don't require an employer for that program. That visa is purely based on your own skills and credentials that fulfill the demand occupations or the skill shortages in Australia. Now, how that program works is based on a points test system.
What are those points allocated to?
So those points are allocated to certain factors. They can be your age, your English proficiency, your qualification levels, work experience. So the minimum points when it comes to independent skilled migration is currently at 65. So if you calculate your points and you meet that minimum threshold or that minimum point score, then you are able to submit something called an expression of interest. It's basically an invitation pool where you place yourself on the database, and every month or so the government or state government will then issue an invitation to people in that pool and then allow them to apply for permanent residency.
Okay, so if you're applying independently for permanent residency, what does that get you? Are you allowed to work independently? Are you allowed to, do you still need sponsorship?
No. So a permanent residency visa essentially means that you have rights to live and work indefinitely in Australia. You may as well, similar to an Australian citizen, except you don't have the passport or the protection of the Australian Embassy, but otherwise you have access to all the healthcare and welfare benefits, and you're able to take loans out, put your children into schools, get rebates or subsidies from the government. So permanent residency is basically your ability to stay in Australia indefinitely.
Okay, and if we're comparing that to employer sponsorship, do you have the same rights under employer sponsorship? Do you have access to schooling for your kids, healthcare, those social benefits?
Well, it depends on which type of employer-sponsored visa that you apply for. So there's two types of employer-sponsored visas. There is the temporary work visa, which is the 482, and then there is the permanent or provisional permanent visas, which is the 186 and the 494. Now, in terms of the benefits, the 482 on a temporary work visa has more restrictions on it. However, with the permanent residency visas, again, that would be access to all Australian benefits, I suppose.
So when people are considering making a move to employer sponsorship, does employer sponsorship entail financial assistance? Is it financial sponsorship? Or what is sponsorship alluding to?
So when it comes to employer sponsorship, it essentially means that there is an employer that is willing to give you an undertaking in order for you to work in Australia, or they're to endorse your application for you to be issued a work visa. Now, there are two parts when it comes to employer sponsorship. There is the part in which an employer needs to complete or lodge their own applications, and that is company-based applications. They do need to pay fees and costs that are involved in registering their business as a sponsor, but also fulfilling the requirements to advise the department of that an international worker will be filling a certain role in the business.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to sponsorship, that is what sponsorship means.
So it doesn't mean that they have to pay for anything?
No, the employer is only obligated to pay the costs of the company and the applications for the company in order to endorse the position that the worker is going to fill.
Okay. So if I, for instance, do need financial assistance, who do I speak to? Is that something that needs to be discussed with the employer? Or how would I as a candidate get financial assistance?
There generally is an expectation that candidates would fulfill their own requirements for the work visa, whether it be preliminary requirements such as skills assessments or English tests, and also the costs involved with their application process. Now, when it comes to financial assistance, there are options in which an employer may be willing to provide financial assistance. They may provide that assistance in terms of employment benefits. That's a conversation to be had with the employers and other incentives that are included in the job offer. But it is not an obligation of an employer to cover the costs of the worker's visa or any relocation costs or assessments that are required to fulfill their part of the visa application process.
Okay. So if you're saying that, if we're saying that a candidate does need financial assistance, it's if you're wanting to look at Australia, it's best to financially prepare yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
But if there is the need, it's always a discussion to be had with the employer and the candidate.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Let's discuss some of the mistakes people make when they are considering their moves to Australia. Okay. What are some of the common mistakes we see when applicants are deciding on Australia? Let's not even talk about visa applications yet. What are some of the misconceptions you see or mistakes you see that people have when they are considering Australia as a whole in terms of movement migration?
I think one of the common mistakes is people's misconception or misunderstanding of how the system and the options work. A lot of clients come and speak with me, and they talk about how they read blogs, they looked at social media, they chat GPT, spoke to their cousin's friend's dog. The Australian immigration system is quite complex. The information that's publicly available can be quite convoluted, and it's important for people to understand that even though they may read a lot of this information or get tips or advice and opinions from other people, essentially people's circumstances are on a case-by-case basis. When you speak with other people or read things up, people make a lot of assumptions that they align to whatever situation they've read up on or been spoken to someone about, and that sometimes that assumption is either incorrect or there's other options and other pathways that they don't realise is available to them.
So another one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, do you need a job offer to make the move to Australia?
Well, no, you don't. A job offer, even though it's ideal, is not necessarily the only option that you have in order to move to Australia. There are other visa programs, other visa pathways that you can choose to facilitate a move to Australia, whether it be through one of the temporary visa programs or even the independent skilled migrant program.
So when it comes to documentation and visa applications, what do you see as some of the bigger or most common mistakes amongst applications, especially for those who tend to want to do things by themselves?
It's important that when you're providing documentation, that the documentation is accurate and relevant, because that's the only evidence that the department rely on in order to make a decision about your visa. And so you do need to ensure that the information you provide is what the criteria is requesting or asking of you. When it comes to documentation, clients either tend to provide information that is insufficient or even inaccurate or inconsistent.
Okay.
And so when you are providing inconsistent or insufficient documentation or information, then a decision can be made based on the inconsistencies or the insufficiencies of the documentation, which may lead to a refusal.
Okay. So is it safe to say that sometimes if you're doing it by yourself, you are providing information based on the context you know exists?
Yes. Yeah,
but when a third party is looking at it, they're looking at it subjectively and they can't understand the backstory of the information you may be providing.
Yes, that's
so
correct.
When they are looking at it, or when the department is looking at it, they are looking at the facts in front of them and not the assumptions behind it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The other thing about documentation is that there's particular criteria that needs to be met. If a person submits an application on their own and provides that information, they may not be able to identify exactly what that criteria needs to be, how that criteria needs to be demonstrated.
While they're putting it forward, they may not be putting it forward in the way that it needs to be understood.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Or even putting the right information forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of mistakes and misconceptions, I see that a lot of people are advised to do skill assessments for the purpose of securing employment. How accurate is it that a skill assessment directly leads to employment?
The purpose of a skills assessment is to ensure that the person can demonstrate that their qualifications and skills meet the same Australian standards. It's essentially a procedure or a process of evaluation that is determined by the government bodies. Having a skills assessment is useful, but it doesn't guarantee a job offer. Or securing employment with a company in Australia is ultimately a decision through a recruitment process that is done with the employer and yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Is it true that for some occupations there is a mandatory skill assessment?
Yes, that's correct, yeah. So particularly in the trades industry, there are certain countries and occupations that require mandatory skills assessment. That is for the temporary work visa.
Okay.
For permanent work visas and any kind of permanent skill-based visas, you do require mandatory skills assessment, regardless of what country or occupation you're in.
So the best first step would be to first understand or speak to someone, understand if your skills does need a mandatory skill assessment.
Yes.
Then to pursue that rather than working back to front based on assumptions.
Yes, that's correct. I would say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for instance, Oh, so for instance, an accountant. Would an accountant need a skill assessment in order to secure a job?
No, they don't if it is a temporary work visa.
Okay. Would a welder need a skill assessment in order, a South African welder need a skill assessment in order to secure employment?
Yes, they do, yeah. So South African welders, Filipino mechanics, Zimbabwean fitter and turners would need a mandatory skills assessment for a temporary work visa.
Okay. Would the employer want to see the skill assessment before they consider the candidate, or is this really something that is more important for government?
Well, because it's a mandatory requirement for government, it's something that needs to be done anyway. If a candidate does have a skills assessment, it would be more favourable for them, and employers would certainly consider that and would want to look at that before they proceed any interviewing process. So it would be beneficial for a candidate to have completed a skills assessment. It would be more favourable for them because employers will be able to undertake the interviewing process a lot sooner, and it would speed up the procedures for